Hey guys, what's up? It is Friday, and it is time for another episode of The Breakfast Club with me being the host. So, the topic that I want to bring up is somewhat more of a question, I guess. Like something that I keep going over and over again in my head, and one that I am going to share with you guys now in the hopes that maybe you guys can kind of come up with some interesting insights into it. It's not one that, like I said, it's more of a question, and while I have opinions on it, I don't really have a concrete answer or one that I can, like, just straight up say, this is my opinion and that's it, that's what I'm sticking with. It's more one that I'm just like, constantly musing about. So it's like, and that is basically the issue of merchants. That's how I'm going to phrase it. When I say merchants, I'm not, I know that's not necessarily a contemporary word, but I'm just using it as a blanket term for, businessmen, salesmen, the whole capitalists, if you will, people who basically engage in commerce, buying and selling, things like that. The issue I'm having, the thing that I'm constantly going over with in my head is if they are a necessary evil and if they should have as much power in society as they do. Hear me out on this. And I'm not trying to sound like one of those crazy conspiracy theory type guys, because I know this particular concept has been brought up by some people who might not have that much blood going to their brains, but hear me out on this. Right now, there seems to be this big backlash among certain circles against capitalism, or should we say the abuses of capitalism. While in broad strokes, this particular ideology, this particular, economic ideology has been celebrated, more or less, in the United States and in many Western countries. The question then comes, should it be tempered in some way? Certain European countries feel that it should be tempered, have certain regulations on it, and they will add certain socialistic, counters to it in order to try to keep it, balanced, if you will. While in the United States, as far as the status quo is concerned, it shouldn't really be regulated all that much, and especially when you look from people on the right, it shouldn't really have much regulation at all. You'll even have, certain people, libertarians especially, who feel that there should be, it should be out of the question. Government shouldn't even be talking about regulating commerce or the economy. Let the market decide. Any sort of regulation into that whatsoever, any sort of rules when it comes to what merchants do and how they get the economy going, it's completely anathema to a proper free society. Never mind the fact that actual libertarianism doesn't really believe that, but the United States, we tend to warp things all the time, so whatever. Well, I should say classical libertarianism. Classical libertarianism is not practiced in the United States. That's a whole other topic, whole other video. But the point I'm trying to make is, basically, they're supposed to be the good guys. And yet, it's like deep down inside, we know that businessmen are not the good guys. We got problems with them. A lot of them. Even people on the right. Unless you happen to be a huge devotee, deep in the right in terms of like business politics, and you're just like, nah, leave the companies alone. They can do no wrong. They should be considered like individuals, like that had ruled a while back in the Supreme Court. Let them do what they will. I really found someone that gung-ho, and even those guys, sooner or later, you're going to get them to admit, but this is wrong, or this is wrong. Like, let's put it this way. If you're the type of person who's like, now leave commerce alone, but yet at the same time you get mad if you hear that somebody from some other country might be taking your job, you have conflicting thoughts. I'm not going to explain why that is. That I've already talked on this before. I believe I have talked about it on this very show. But yeah, if on one hand you think that the market should be free to do what it wants, At least you're saying that in one breath, but in the other breath, you don't want Mexicans coming over to take your job. You have conflicting thoughts on the economy and how capitalism should flow, should flourish. If you don't understand that, this is not a topic that you should be discussing at length. But the main thing is, it seems that, as far as my musings go, is that when it comes to businessmen, merchants, we tend to have a problem with them. We know that there's a point where they're going to want to go too far. There's always that fear that they're trying to scam us in some way, or they're trying to take our money unfairly or unjustly. And they're always trying to find ways to bend rules or twist things in government so that they get all of our money, we end up with nothing. It's part of, the income inequalities and the economic problems that we tend to see and argue about in the United States, to the point where now there is a contingent of people who are actively saying, oh, we need some more socialism in this country. And that is a very controversial thing to say in the United States. It's a bit more popular to say these days. It's not as taboo as it used to be, but it's still not exactly a statement that, the mainstream citizens, the everyday person is going to be comfortable with saying, despite the fact that many of the tenets in that other ideology they actually believe in. But deep down inside, we have a problem with merchants. Look at, for instance, let's just to take a lighter example. Look at how we deal with the video game industry. Right now, there is a big backlash going on with people who play video games and the people who publish video games. There is a consensus among, gamers that these game companies have gone too far. The publishers have gone too far with money-making scheme after money-making scheme, with scam after scam, of trying to find ways to milk people out of their money unfairly. Everything from, constant pre-order bonuses to get you to fork over your money before the product is even made, to having you spend more money on the product after you've already spent money on the product in the form of, loot boxes, DLC, and microtransactions, and all this type of stuff in order to keep the industry afloat. Which has had many people beginning to ask, if you need this many money-making schemes just to keep the industry afloat, doesn't that mean that the industry itself is screwed? Like with so many other particular industries, somebody makes a product, you like the product, you pay for the product, and that's it. And if the product is really good, that's what keeps the company afloat. Oh, this is a really good product. Thank you. Here's your money. But with this industry, that's not enough. The video game industry, that's not enough. You like the product, you pay for the product, and now they get you hooked on the product, and now you got to pay more on the very product that you already spent money on. And they say that they have to do that in order to keep the industry afloat. That's a problem. And many people are suspecting that it's a lie. It's just a way to milk more money off of you. And it's interesting to note that unlike many other industries, the video game industry is not regulated all that much. The merchants are more or less running free in that industry. And people are upset. Look at the cable industry. Look at the internet. Huge war going on right now with the whole idea of net neutrality and the fact that people feel betrayed. You got a guy who used to work for these telecom companies now in charge of the FCC, and we see what he's doing, and we consider him to be scum, and we consider the companies that put him in there to be scum. These are merchants. They're selling a product, and they're trying to find ways to leverage things so they can make more money off of that. We got a problem with it. What I'm finding interesting is that the suspicion of the businessman, of the company owner, of the merchant, is not new. You look back in older societies and you find that there's always that contingent that looks upon the merchant with disdain. In fact, there are even certain societies that held them on the low end of the scale. These days, we look at businessmen, they rake in millions and they're put on the covers of magazines and they are more or less celebrated. This guy is smart. This man is shrewd. This man is ruthless. These CEOs love them or hate them, they're still put at a certain high level of status. In the past, they were looked at with disdain depending on what culture you're looking at. Japan, for feudal Japan, when I think of that, I also happen to think of, they had their caste system. And it was interesting to me how the merchant was viewed in that society. They were looked upon with disdain because all they could care about is making money. And yet they were later on envied because they were able to make all that money and enjoy a level of status that some people felt was undeserving. Like, only the samurai is supposed to be up here, but these guys are living lives better than us. What the fuck? There are certain also aspects of finance and economics that were unjustly, some of the darker aspects of it, some of the shadier aspects of it, that were very unjustly put upon as a label upon certain groups of people in different cultures. Just ask the Jews. To this day, certain racists label these people as all they want is money and all that. Look at how they invite it and all that type of stuff. And while it's labeled on a certain group of people, notice what it's also labeled on. Merchants, financiers, businessmen, that sort of thing. The guys who dabble in money. Society's always looked with suspicion upon these guys. Now, here's where my musings get into. As far as just the business class is concerned, when you're looking at people, they deal in money, they deal with the economy, buying and selling. How much of that is deserved and how much of that is, not so undeserving? How much of that suspicion is justified? How much of it isn't? See, on one hand, I'm not stupid enough to think that we should just simply get rid of all commerce altogether. I mean, the basic trading of goods is how societies function. You have to, when it comes to getting items and services that you need, you're going to be bartering other goods and services. That's why we have an economy. This is why we have, money, the concept of money. This all evolved from that basic need of trading goods and services. So at some point, you're going to have a class of people who just deal primarily in that. So you could say, to use that term as in the beginning, a necessary evil. Question is, how big do we allow it to go? And how much suspicion should we truly have on this class of people? Are their actions inherently immoral? Is there a moral or an ethical side to commerce? Is it just a tool? I happen to lean on the side of things that it's just a tool and it's how you use it that makes it ethical or unethical. But when it comes to being in, the field of making money, when you start dealing with the economy, when you're buying and selling, when you're dealing with advertising, when you're dealing with merchandising, all these sorts of things, is it the way that we're using these things that makes it ethical or not unethical, or is there an essence of, being unethical in those actions in and of itself, like, the constant building of money? I think that's a question that we're going to have to seriously ask ourselves, because it's the way that we do business, it's the way that we do these things that determine determine its impact on society at large. At least that's what I think. But considering the suspicion of, merchants, of businessmen, has been with us for so long and have led to some rather interesting and sometimes drastic consequences, it makes me wonder if it's not just business practices that we have to look at, but the people themselves. Is there a justification to looking at these people with suspicion, and should they be knocked down a peg, or should they be left alone and it's just the way they do things that should be changed? Or is it a mix of both? These are the things that keep me up at night. These are the thoughts that keep me up at night. And I'm sure some of you guys are thinking, oh, this has an obvious answer. Problem is, we've had so-called obvious answers in the past and they haven't really worked out too well. Or you could say that those ideas weren't implemented well, but the end result is still that we're dealing with a messed up situation. We still have income inequality. We still have people doing things in business that anybody with a conscience will be looking at it. That is messed up. You don't do that. You don't sell tainted products that could harm the environment. You don't say things like you can own water and you're, hoarding it all to sell while people are dealing with, wildfires and droughts. You don't try to monopolize on, a medium that people use to communicate with every day, and people were able to build their businesses freely before people started trying to monetize and how the service is used. You don't constantly try to come up with gambling and addicting schemes just to sell your products. Like, these are things that we associate with criminal behavior, but we're seeing it in everyday commerce and in everyday life. Which leads me back to the question I'm wondering. Is it the way we do business, or is it the business themselves? Is it how these people were taught, or is it the people themselves? Did people in the past have a point when they viewed, when they looked at merchants sometimes with the same amount of scorn that they would look at a street peddler or some diseased individual? Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but you know what I mean. Well, I'm posing the question. You guys tell me your thoughts. I'll catch you later.